Welcome to the webinar today on PCOD in infertility. Too many do spoil. September being PCOS Awareness Month, we strive to bring you at least 3 webinars this month on PCOS, starting from today, followed by September 16th and September 30th. The scholar of the day, Honorable Dr. Dipankar Banerjee, is Director and IVF Consultant, Ideal Fertility IVF and Genetic Center Private Limited, Jabalpur. On behalf of Jacksonpal Pharmaceuticals Limited, makers of Cystelia M, the right combination of 40:1 ratio of myo-inositol and D-chiroinositol, and Cystelia 35, the most effective pill for PCOS, I am Dr. Vipin Tyagi, along with my teammates, Dr. Deepika Chabra, Mr. Amit Saxena. We welcoming you all to the seventh in the series of 7 days, 7 scholars, A to Z of infertility every Friday, a Rewadi Ox and Gynae Society initiative. Thank you, Dr. Seema Mittal, ma'am, President Rewadi Ox and Gynae Society, convener and moderator for organizing this ICOG accredited webinar series supported by Lalita Memorial Hospital Infertility Center, Rewadi. We are privileged to have amongst us esteemed chairpersons Dr. Umesh Jindal, Founder Secretary, Greater Chandigarh Chapter IFS, Dr. Anita Sabrawal, Secretary, Forum of St. South Delhi, Dr. Poonam Lal, Senior Specialist and Unit Head, DDU Hospital, Delhi. Welcome panel members, Dr. Sita Gupta, Joint Registrar, Indian Fertility Society, IFS, Dr. Ratna Singhal, Senior Executive, Rewadi of St. Society, Dr. Cyrus P., Chairperson-elect, Midlife, Management Committee, FOXY. Congratulations to Dr. Cyrus on his win in the recently concluded FOXY elections. Welcome our precious attendees. Please make note this session is streaming on Facebook Live. The recording will remain on Jacksonpal's YouTube channel for reference and knowledge sharing. As this series is brought to you by Jacksonpal Medical Services as a knowledge sharing initiative. We request all to please post your queries by text in the Q&A box, which will be answered at the end. I will now request Dr. Seema Mittal ma'am to kindly initiate the session.
Thank you, Dr. Vipin. Thank you, Team Jacksonpal. And it's a pleasure to be with the wonderful Galaxy today. As you know, like when we talk of PCOD, for me it's like an onion. You keep on peeling layers by layers, and in the end you end up just with tears in your eyes because you draw no conclusions. There are so many classifications, so many pathophysiological issues, and then so many treatment guidelines. If you go to literature, endless literature, you cannot decide, and it is not possible for everybody to read everything and conclude. So we had this platform of A to Z of infertility where we had 7 scholars on 7 days and 7 scholars in our webinar participating. So today I just hope that with wonderful chairpersons and the panelists and the great speaker, we will have the take home messages on PCOD, such a vast topic where we can hold conferences and CMEs for days together. So let me introduce the chairpersons first today. So we have Dr. Umesh Jindal. Dr. Umesh Jindal is the director. Speaker Dr. Pankaj Banerjee. Definitely Dr. Dipankar Banerjee will be introduced by Dr. Umesh Jindal. And it is a privilege to have him with us. And after the lecture, we will actually know that it was worth attending this webinar today. So we have Umesh Jindal ma'am, who is the director of Jindal IVF Center, and she has organized so many conferences and so many lessons we have taken from us. And she's been pioneer in ART in Chandigarh over last 22 years. And all the services are available at her center. And this time IFS is organized at Chandigarh. Dr. Anita Sabrawal is the executive AOGD, and she is at present the chairperson of Public Awareness Committee. And next we have Dr. Poonam Lal, and ma'am is much well-read person, and she has special interest in fertility and high risk, and she's the senior specialist at Deen Dayal Upadhyay Hospital, New Delhi. And We have our panelists today. We will talk. Dr. Shweta Gupta is the clinical director and founder, IVF Reproductive Medicine, Medicover Fertility Delhi. We have Dr. Ratna Singhal. She is the overall gold medalist and the most intelligent executive member of our Rewadi of Gynae Society. Welcome, Dr. Ratna. Welcome, Dr. Shweta. And we have Dr. Shaijas, the multi-talented, all-in-one, and he is the king with many crowns. And really, today we are going to have the gist of everything. Welcome all my esteemed panelists, and hope we all have something to take back. Welcome, sir. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I must thank our Dr. Seema for giving such a great opportunity to be here when such a great speaker is going to give us his deliberations and we are going to learn a very difficult subject. So I think I'm fortunate that I've been given this duty to introduce our worthy speaker, Dr. Dipankar Banerjee, who's a gem and jewel in the field of obs and gynae, especially this PCOD. He's got special interest in reproductive endocrinology and fetal medicine for the last 30 years. And he's the director and IVF consultant of Ideal Fertility IVF and Genetic Center at Jabalpur. And he's also working in interventional sonography, endoscopy, in vitro fertilization and prenatal diagnosis. And he has so many awards and activities to his credit. So I think it will be really great listening to him today. So I'll request Dr. Dipankar Banerjee to please kindly go on with your deliberations.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, madam. And I'm very much thankful to Dr. Seema and Rewadi Obstetrics and Gynec Society to allow me to talk in front of the August gathering. And it will be a great privilege for me to talk in front of you regarding polycystic ovarian disease. I run lots of training courses with OBGY students, young gynecologists. So I have a pattern of teaching which I am following in this webinar also. Because my idea is putting PowerPoint few slides, but more with the whiteboard, and I will try to do as much as possible justice to the PCOD case. I am talking to the polycystic ovarian disease. I have few slides which I will be following those slides, and why we study polycystic ovarian disease. What is the implication of polycystic ovarian disease on oocyte quality? What is endocrine and reproductive effect of polycystic ovarian syndrome? Most of the things I have taken references from these two major reviews. The implication of PCOS on oocyte quality is, we do an introduction, we will talk about oogenesis, we will talk about oogenesis in PCOS and what is the oogenesis in normal. What is oocyte maturation in PCOS, the nuclear maturation, the epigenetic maturation, and cytoplasmic maturation. What is the metabolic disturbances as a rationale for impaired oocyte quality, the potential effect of heterogeneous phenotypes. What is the menstrual and endometrial effects in adolescent PCOD, unopposed progesterone problem, unopposed estrogen, sorry, it is written wrong, unopposed estrogen problem, weight, choice of oral contraceptive pills in PCOD, and insulin sensitizers. What is hyperandrogenism in PCOD, hirsutism, anti-androgen treatment, and acne? How PCOD creates infertility, how weight loss helps, how clomiphene citrate helps, how aromatase inhibitors work, what is clomiphene citrate resistance, and how we use gonadotrophins. Next step comes how we do IVF in PCOD, what is laparoscopic ovarian drilling, and what is the obstetric effects of PCOS. After that, we will see few patients with PCOD and their IVF. Now I am starting my lecture. Why we study PCOD? Because PCOD is one of the biggest problems in our day-to-day practice, and there are two types of patients. One is adolescent and one is post-marriage couple. In married couple, there are two types of girls they are coming to us. One is obese and one is lean, but both are having PCOS. In PCOS, why they don't menstruate every month? What is the problem with the oocyte? What is the why there are more oocytes? I am coming with the diagram. If you see the embryology, this is gut and this is embryo and this is the gonadal ridge. This gonadal ridge has this is mesoderm. Why I am going into this detail? Because I want to show how polycystic ovaries start. This is mesoderm and this is the covering by epithelium. Here is Mullerian duct, here is Wolffian duct which goes around. This is the basic things we study in our embryology. This gonadal ridge, which is of mesoderm, it receives germ cell from yolk sac, and these germ cells they travel from the mesentery and to the gonadal ridge, and they reside over here. In polycystic ovarian disease, we all know there are more eggs. That means there are more oocytes. That means there are more germ cells. That means the germ cells which are coming from the yolk sac, it is actually coming from the epiblast, it resides over here. Why they have more oocytes in PCOD patients or PCOD ladies? That means there must be some problem. This epithelium of the gonadal ridge, it invades into the mesoderm of the gonadal ridge. When it invades, it goes deep into medulla, then it forms the testis, and most of the germ cells in testis are in medulla. But in ovary, if there is no Y chromosome, these oocytes or primordial germ cells, I should not say oocytes, these are primordial germ cells, they are surrounded by epithelial cords in the cortex. These epithelial cells, when they surround the germ cell, is called primordial follicle. These primordial follicles are fixed for a lady or for a girl in utero. So this amount in polycystic ovarian disease is definitely more than the normal. That means there is a genetic or epigenetic problem where the oocytes are coming more, they are residing more in gonadal ridge. You must have noticed that when there is XX normal female, if I remove one X or remove the long arm of X, the residing of the number of the oocytes in the cord will be less. So we have ovarian insufficiency. So there is one spectrum ovarian insufficiency, and there is one spectrum where there is a high amount of primordial cells. These primordial cells are surrounded by epithelial cell derived cells. This is primordial follicle. This primordial follicle either it divides or it converts into primary follicle. This primary follicle, this covering cell becomes little bit larger. These cells, they produce AMH. You must have noticed that polycystic ovarian disease patients have high amount of AMH. What does this high amount of AMH creates in polycystic ovarian? This AMH is an aromatase inhibitor. That means when there is a high amount of AMH produced by the granulosa primordial follicle or primary follicle rather, this AMH will create an atmosphere that there will be less change of androgen to estradiol or estrogen. That means whenever there is intrafollicular high AMH, there will be less aromatization of the androgen. Now this gonadal ridge, when there is a oocyte and there is cell around the oocyte making a primary follicle, few cells from the stroma, they also make an organization. These cells are called theca cells. These theca cells are under the effect of, when the girl grows, under the effect of LH, it converts cholesterol to androgen. I am not going detail, but androgen is mostly androstenedione and it is delta 5 pathway. This androgen, when it is synthesized in theca cell, it goes into the intrafollicular compartment and it is converted to estradiol, mostly androstenedione or testosterone goes to estradiol. But there is a problem in polycystic ovarian disease. There is high amount of AMH and there is some problem in utilization of glucose. So what happens in polycystic ovarian disease? This is a muscle cell or fat cell. Whenever there is a glucose, they are dependent on glucose for metabolism and energy. This glucose enters into through glucose transferase or GLUT4. This door is being opened by insulin. There is a problem here. So you need more insulin to open the gate so that glucose can enter in fat cell or muscles. Whenever there is a problem in opening the door, their insulin is released more from pancreas. This insulin utilized over here and comes into ovary also. It has two functions in ovary. One is giving energy and another is steroidogenesis. This insulin, when it comes into the ovary, it acts on theca cell. How? Because insulin is a growth factor. You can call it growth factor or insulin-like growth factor. Whenever there is insulin-like growth factor increases in ovary, there will be theca cell hyperplasia. Whenever there is theca cell hyperplasia, the factory of producing androgen will be more. Whenever there is a high amount of androgen over here, the androgen percolates through the basement membrane because oocytes are always away from the blood circulation before ovulation. That is very important. That's why they don't produce androstenedione and testosterone. Normally, this androgen, when goes into the intrafollicular compartment, they are granulosa cells. And this is the basement membrane. Whenever they go into this, under the effect of FSH, they convert into E2, that is estradiol. Estradiol is a hormone under which this oocyte grows well. You must have noticed that whenever we do ovulation induction or IVF in polycystic ovarian disease, when we get this egg, there are more chances of abortion. Why there are more chances of abortion? Most of the time it is because of chromosomal non-disjunction. I am coming into that. Why I am going into this? Because it is a pathophysiology what is happening. Then we will come to the treatment, what we should do. This thecal hyperplasia with androgen, when it comes into the intrafollicular compartment under the effect of FSH with aromatase, it converts into E2. But when there is a high amount of substrate, that is high amount of androgen, when it comes into intrafollicular compartment, this is less and aromatase becomes relatively poor, less aromatase. This less aromatase is taken over by 5-alpha reductase. This 5-alpha reductase converts androstenedione or testosterone to their 5-alpha derivative. This 5-alpha derivatives, when it creates intrafollicular androgen very high, the chances of growth of the oocyte goes down. If you see, compare this thing with what is happening with the undifferentiated gonad. This, the stromal cell in male, they form, which are along the germ cell, are called Sertoli cell. In female, along the germ cell, they are called granulosa cells. Other than Sertoli cell or granulosa cell, the stromal cell which forms in female, it makes theca. But in male, it makes leading cell. Why I am comparing this thing? I am coming to that point. This Sertoli cell has a capacity to increase AMH production so that the Mullerian duct should not form in male. The same analog of Sertoli cell in granulosa compartment or in female also produce increased AMH. This AMH is meant for male derivation. So this AMH, when it happens in female, creates problem in the female endocrine. That means whenever we do a oocyte, hello?
We are talking about the early pregnancy cells, the Sertoli cells.
These are the cells in early pregnancy in undifferentiated gonad of a woman, of a embryo.
Very early pregnancy, okay.
This certain, okay?
Okay.
This undifferentiated gonad of 8 weeks, 6 weeks embryo, these Sertoli, this is a germ cell, this is germ cell. These Sertoli cell, they make AMH. Here the granulosa cell, they also make AMH. That means there are some problem in the genetics of AMH also, which is being produced in high amount in female. Whenever there is an AMH, high amount in female, in normally AMH in male, it prevents Mullerian system, allow Wolffian system, that is male. But if it happens in female, although the Mullerian system develops, but there is a problem in ovary, or problem in the egg, or problem in the production of the androgen. Whenever we do a oocyte reserve test in any patient, we estimate nowadays AMH and antral follicle count. Why we do this? Because in polycystic ovarian disease, there is high recruitment of germ cell. Whenever there is a high recruitment of germ cell, that means there is some problem in recruitment. There is very less apoptosis which happens, or death of the germ cell which don't grow, go to atresia, and they form primordial to primary follicle. In polycystic ovary, it is less. That means if you do an ultrasound in or a histology of a cortex of a polycystic ovarian disease, you will find multiple follicles in its cortex. This is the definition of polycystic ovarian morphology of the ovary. This is the one criteria of Rotterdam. You must have seen two types of patients. One is the follicles are arranged in cortex, and another patient where the follicles are in the stroma in the mid also. You must have seen two types of patients coming to you. One is with obesity, that obesity is very high in waist separation, and another is lean. You must have seen in obese patients, the ovarian morphology is mostly like this. It is usually not in the cortex, it is throughout the stroma, throughout the ovary, and stroma is high. This stroma is actually theca cell. This theca cell produces more androgen. This androgen creates obesity, or obesity creates androgenicity. Things are little bit confusing still, but the thing is, this obese patient will have this type of stroma, and they are difficult to treat until unless they reduce their weight. But when you see lean patients, these lean patients' ovaries are, although they are volume wise high, that means they should be more than 10 cubic centimeter in volume. One of the very important definitions. Polycystic ovarian morphology with more volume, but most of the time they are arranged like this. If you stimulate this patient, either clomiphene citrate, letrozole, gonadotropin, things are very difficult to get even stimulation. But in this cases, this is, if you stimulate, they will grow like this. This is hyperstimulation. Now, I'm coming to the definition now. What is polycystic ovarian disease? One is, there should be anovulation or amenorrhea. This amenorrhea more than 35 or more days, or anovulation. Second, there will be increased androgen. This androgen might give an effect, that is hirsutism plus minus acne. And third is, when you do an ultrasound, you will get polycystic morphology of the ovary. This polycystic morphology without this is not PCOD. This polycystic morphology should be 2 to 9 millimeter of primary follicles, more than 12 in a section, usually given a definition. But most important thing is, it should be more than 10 cc, cubic cc. How you measure? You can measure through an ultrasound with ellipse or by 2 dimensions. Are all PCO morphology are polycystic ovarian disease? No. So we can go for anovulation, androgen problem, or hirsutism, and polycystic morphology. This oocyte granulosa cell, basement membrane, and theca cell, hyperplasia, LH acting over here, androgen comes over here, FSH comes here and acts on this to aromatize and create E2. So there are two types of cells, one is granulosa and another theca, and two types of gonadotrophin, that is FSH and LH. So you can explain everything by two gonadotrophin theory. And there is a thecal hyperplasia. So there are more androgen, there will be more intrafollicular androgen. Whenever there is intrafollicular androgen happens, this intrafollicular androgen, what happens in oocyte? Whenever there is a germ cell is in at the 4th month of pregnancy, the girl is in utero. These chromosomes, they are crossing over like this. So this is a diplotin stage, and its status is like this, and it remains till it ovulates. That means there should be a pull of chromosomes so that the 46 becomes 23 and 23. This is first meiotic region. Whenever there is intrafollicular androgen environment, this pull is abnormal. So there might be a 22 or 24 combination. This creates either monosomy or trisomy, or it is an aneuploid. This aneuploidy creates more abortion. So whenever we do clomiphene citrate or letrozole, even in IVF, the chances of abortion increase. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't give good success rate. It gives success rate, but we have to reduce this LH activity, reduce this androgen, and reduce the intrafollicular androgen atmosphere to intrafollicular estradiol. This is the basic pathophysiology of the polycystic ovary. Why we are studying? Because we want to treat them at every stage. Should we treat anovulation? We should treat androgen. We should treat infertility also. So with first point, that is menstrual abnormality. There are two types of patients are coming. One is adolescent. Adolescents are also having irregular period. They might be having acne. They might be having hirsutism. Are all adolescents with these features? They might be having a polycystic morphology of the ovary when ultrasound is being done. Do all adolescents like this? It is very common in adolescents. Are PCOD till we diagnose this androgen biochemically, increased testosterone. For adult, we need this definition of menstrual abnormality or amenorrhea with hyperandrogenism and PCO morphology. Any two is PCOS, PCOD or PCOS. But in adolescence, it should be all three. And the girl is having androgen. This endometrium is hypertrophied because there is unopposed
Sir, can we shift to practical tips now from anatomy? I think because we are really running short of time then.
Is not taking it is creating problem. The problem follicles. Whenever there is a stimulation in normal lady, normal girl or normal woman, this FSH increases the estradiol and the FSH goes down. This estradiol inhibits the FSH level. With this low FSH level,
Sir, Dipankar sir, can I say 1 second, sir? Sir, since we have a panel discussion also, can we shorten it and yeah. And
I am finishing. I have given 40 minutes. I am finishing now.
okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Estrogen endometrial hyperplasia. So, problem with the VEGF. I am not going into that detail. Coming to the treatment part, this treatment part first is clomiphene citrate. I am not going into that detail how we use clomiphene citrate. Clomiphene citrate is estrogen antagonist and it increases FSH. Or we use letrozole. Letrozole is more preferable nowadays. These, if it doesn't work, then we use gonadotropin. But the problem of this is multi-follicular development. It creates multiple pregnancy. So next is we do IVF or ovarian regrowth. If we do IVF, there are more chances of OHSS. Better use gonadotropin and GnRH antagonist. If there is problem with the number of follicles, use GnRH trigger, which is only possible when you use GnRH antagonist. Next is LOD, laparoscopic ovarian. This also gives very good result in obese patient. These are the few things I want to discuss with the PCOD. PCOD is a very large subject and it is very difficult. I have been told that I will be talking to 40 minutes. I am sorry if I exceeded that limit. I am finishing this my talk and I don't know how was the presentation with this blackboard and whiteboard presentation. Thank you for patient listening and connected to me.
Thank you, sir. I would request Dr. Poonam Lal if there are any questions from sir. Dr. Poonam. Dr. Poonam Lal. Yes, Dr. Poonam.
Dr. Seema, he has explained in a very nice way, starting from the embryology, basic pathology, basic physiology, then pathology, pathophysiology. I think everything he has covered. And we should be moving towards the practical point of view, I think, of the session. I think pathophysiology is quite clear. We all know that.
Having panel and sir will be answering in the panel the practical tips. And we have Dr. Umesh Jindal to thank sir for the presentation. So maybe sir, like he's such a wonderful teacher who needs more time. 40 minutes is just not sufficient for him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
agree, Seema. Actually, this pathophysiology is a very interesting topic.
Right.
And once you go into the details, you go into the every detail, and it's very difficult to cover in this in such a short time.
Right,
and but the basis of that, why PCO has high androgens, why PCO has high AMH, and why there is multiple follicles you see, and the consequences of theca cell hyperplasia, and how we can interrupt the hormonal disturbance which occurs because of altered LH and FSH secretion and their pulsatility. So if you understand the basics, it's always easier to handle the clinical situations. But I think we need more time, and maybe more detailed one-to-one class would be, he knows the pathophysiology in very great detail.
Right.
And it's congratulations, sir, taking this in detail, and we could understand and unfortunately there was interruptions because of internet problem, so we could get, I think, part of it, not 100%, but the information is very useful in explaining why we have problems of PCO and how we can handle that. I think with that we can move on to the panel discussion, and I think audience would be more interested in practical problems and how to handle that.
Right, ma'am. So we have our wonderful panelists with us, Dr. Shweta, Dr. Ratna, and Dr. Shaijas, and we will have important inputs from Jindal ma'am, Dr. Poonam, Dr. Anita, and Dipankar sir. So we have first question to Dr. Shweta. Dr. Shweta, as sir has talked, when we talk of PCOS, we have emotional factor, endocrine factor, unknown factors, genetic predisposition, and the lifestyle is the latest. So what will be the best classification to understand for all our attendees? What is the best classification? Dr. Shweta. Dr. Shweta?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, definitely.
So when we talk about classification, we have three important things. The first is, of course, as rightly mentioned by Sir, hyperandrogenism. Now, clinical and biochemical. Then we have the anovulation or oligoovulation. And we have third point is polycystic ovaries on the scan. Now, initially, so these three things are there. The Rotterdam classification came in 2003. Before that, there was NICHD classification where these three things were there, either hyperandrogenism or the anovulation. Then came the Rotterdam classification, which was in 2003, and where they said that two out of three is required to make a diagnosis of PCOS. So either hypoandrogenism or anovulation or the polycystic appearance on the scan. When we talk about ultrasound, we have about 12 follicles in an ovary, or the ovarian volume is more than 10. Then thereafter, we had another 2009. So there had been a lot of classifications, and where ultimately, because of the different, there was no consensus. So there were different classifications. In 2018, all the societies, they sat together from different countries, and in fact, it was, I think, very well spread, about 71 countries. They all sat down and they had multiple meetings. And then they prepared the International Classification of PCO, which is 2018, which is quite well evidence-based. And that is what we usually now follow. So where there is like a Rotterdam, we have an hyperandrogenism, and also this one anovulation. When we do that, we also have to rule out other causes. The basic in etiologies, we have to rule out other etiologies like the adrenal cause. We have to do a 17-hydroxyprogesterone test. We also have to rule out thyroid or prolactin. So this was in short, this is how it was, which started with the multiple, societies and many classification. But in the end, we usually like to follow the 2018. And luckily, the Indian Fertility Society also, they presented actually a very nice guideline, and which came out in 2016, which is actually based on Indian patients, and which was done by senior members of the Indian Fertility Society. So we have both the international as well as an Indian guidelines as well.
Thank you, Dr. Shweta. Dr. Shaijas, you want to have any inputs for this? Dr. Shaijas?
Yeah, I think the only thing to add on has to be the evolution that the classification process has gone through, starting from the 90s, where they talked about just making a clinical diagnosis without actually having to subject a patient to ultrasound. That was a time when we did not actually at all believe in the entity called a polycystic ovarian morphology. Coming on to a state today where the polycystic ovarian morphology is being given an importance. At the same time, they continue to tell that you need to pick up that polycystic ovarian morphology well and understand it well. And you should not at all substantiate or probably come to a diagnosis only based on the morphological factor alone. And most importantly is the increasing importance for hyperandrogenism as a single entity for making a diagnosis of polycystic ovarian disease. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Shailesh. Next question to Dr. Ratna. Dr. Ratna, what is the ideal ultrasound criteria for PCOS that you follow? Dr. Ratna Singhal? Sir has already told, actually Dr. Shweta has again discussed. So just want you to highlight, Dr. Ratna.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Dr. Ratna, we can hear you, we can see you smiling, yes.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be part of this discussion. And according to Rotterdam's consensus and Androgen Access and PCOS Society, the ultrasound criteria consists of presence of 12 and more antral follicles and with a diameter of 2 to 9 mm and the ovarian volume of 10 centimeter cube or greater. And recently, I should also go for watching for hyperechoic predominant stromal tissue and intra-ovarian blood flow, which we should watch for stromal RI resistive index more than 0.5 to 0.58 and peak systolic volume, peak systolic velocity more than 10 centimeters per second and increased uterine PI more than 2.85. And that is all.
Thank you, Dr. Ratna. Sir, Dipankar sir said 10 millimeter minimum volume. Sir, the diameter should be 10 mm. Dipankar sir is there with us. So,
can I just add on?
Yes.
Yeah. The only change probably that people are thinking of from the Rotterdam criteria of ultrasound diagnosis of a polycystic ovarian morphology is based on a couple of systematic reviews and international study groups that have actually looked at ovarian morphology, whether this is good enough, more than 12, 2 to 9 mm and more than 10 ml of volume. A 2014 systematic review told that we might actually be making too many diagnoses of a polycystic ovarian morphology when we keep it at 12. So they thought maybe keeping it at maybe 20 or 25 as a cutoff for a single ovary might actually be more helpful in making a reasonably better diagnosis of a polycystic ovarian morphology. So the 2018 international study group that we have has kept a threshold of keeping it at 20 or more per ovary. And most importantly is the added studies that are coming out and telling us that it should not be a single criteria for all. It has to be an age-specific criteria because ovarian volume and follicle number, even in women with PCOS, tends to decrease with age. So probably we are looking forward to a better ultrasound definition of coming onto a polycystic ovarian morphology in the coming days.
Okay. So before I put the next question to Dr. Shailesh, I would like to ask my chairpersons, what are the protocols for induction we are following in PCOS cases as such? Dr. Poonam, Dr. Nita ma'am? Dr. Poonam Lal is with us. Dr. Umesh ma'am, till then you can answer. For the normal PCOS, not for IVF, what is the ideal protocol for our audience, ma'am?
Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Dr. Seema.
Yeah, Dr. Poonam.
Yeah. I was trying to unmute myself.
Okay, then right.
Yeah. We are using actually for PCOS, we are using initially clomiphene. Then increasing the dose of the clomiphene, we are taking up to 150. And if not responding to that, along with IUI, otherwise letrozole. And actually, I'm in the government setup. We are not using these gonadotropins, but in the IVF centers under Dr. Banker, when I do, they are starting with the HMG and gonadotropins. They are starting step up doses, starting from the low dose, going towards the higher dose, because these ovaries, they respond very fast to gonadotropins. So that is a protocol we are using.
Using Dr. Poonam in DDO, letrozole.
Yeah.
No, what do you prefer, Clofert or letrozole? What is your choice? Being given a choice, what will you prefer for your PCOS?
I prefer letrozole because.
Hello. Yes, you are audible. It's available in your government hospitals for patients, so they have to buy from outside.
They buy from outside.
So
They buy
that
from outside.
have limitations that you write what is available.
Yeah, we have limitation. If the patient can't buy from outside, then if it is available, I would prefer letrozole. Otherwise, clomiphene is available, so we are giving clomiphene only.
Okay. Jindal ma'am, what will you say? What is the drug of choice today for normal PCOS?
I think now letrozole is the drug of choice for ovulation induction also, and the clomiphene is a second choice. The success rates with letrozole are better, and monofollicular selection is better. So letrozole is being used as first choice and clomiphene as second choice. It is being used, and if it doesn't work, you can use them. You can try both. And for IVF, it's, I think, very clear now that it has to be an antagonist protocol. In PCO, there's no point in doing agonist protocol because here you are likely to end up in ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And with antagonist protocol and GnRH trigger, we are now, almost all the clinics are now OHSS free. And that's a very, very big, development which has occurred in last few years.
So, ma'am, in spite of the fact that Latos is good, but the fact remains that even today most of the centers are using Clofert with good results. So, is there any benefit of adding steroids with Clofert in these patients?
See, steroids have a specific indication. It's only when you have some adrenal component or a 17 OHP is higher, or it is a gross hirsutism. In those cases where you want to suppress androgens, in only in those cases steroids are useful. See, I am one person who used a lot of steroids for polycystic ovaries earlier on, but now I have restricted my use to select cases where I feel it is indicated, there is a borderline rise of 17 OHP or hirsutism, or it's not responding to other drugs. So steroids should be have limited role.
So, then why have you stopped? Were there any side effects, or was it not effective? And what is the dose that you're giving currently?
Yeah, see, there are plenty of studies in literature where steroids, steroids are not as effective. They do not add anything. And why to add? It is obviously PCO, they are struggling with weight, even otherwise. And with steroids, they do try to gain weight. They have hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance. And many of them are borderline diabetics. With steroids, their balance can be tipped. So we have to use that cautiously.
This is the most important point which we wanted to bring to everybody's notice, that they are in a hyperglucose state, and by adding steroid we might be worsening it. Otherwise, if you want to give, you have to verify the test that there is hyperandrogenemia or there are signs of this.
Yeah,
and now Dr.
Seema, one point can I add?
Definitely.
This letrozole has better effect on the endometrial thickness also compared to your clomiphene.
Yes.
Actually, initially you may see a very poor endometrium because letrozole decreases the estrogen levels in the peripheral blood. So initially there may be very poor endometrium. Like when you do an ultrasound on day 8 or 9, your endometrium would be quite less. But the pickup is very fast. And the final endometrium at the time of ovulation is, pretty good and much more receptive than clomiphene.
Ma'am, what is the good endometrium according to you, Jindal ma'am?
Anything more than 7, good triple line, good, you can, with experienced eyes, you can make out, but triple line standard is more than 7 and triple line.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Dr. Shaijis, so what is the induction protocol that you are using in your IVF patients? Leave aside the studies or whatever the research.
Yeah. I think as, almost all of them, and Umesh Jindal madam very rightly pointed out that it is the NTAC protocol now. Probably gives you the advantage of when compared to the advocated protocol, which was the low dose and the step-up protocol, which used to be used for PCOS women, which used to involve a whole lot of days of stimulation, and hardly ever you can actually get an IVF done that manner. Now with the advent of NTAC, it should always be an NTAC protocol, which appears to be probably the best way. And we start with a recombinant FSH. That is what we generally prefer for our patients. And then on day 5 or day 6, by looking at the follicular diameter, as well as an add-on, you can use an U2 level. 14 mm follicle, leading follicle, or an E2 level of more than 400, you start an NTAG and continue till your triggering day, and then you trigger and do the pickup. Gives you the advantage of probably the shortest duration of usage of gonadotrophins, and as Madam rightly pointed out, the least risk of OHSS too. We have almost made our clinics OHSS free, touch wood, because of the NTAG protocol that has come into being.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Shaijas. And next question to Dr. Shweta, though Dr. Dipankar sir has already discussed. So how you will tell us in brief the practical points, how does AMH levels affect PCOS patients, Dr. Shweta?
So the AMH is actually, I would say, in fact, the most important test, especially, I mean, not only in all fertility clinics, but also in the IVF. I mean, it's almost like a mandatory test. And it helps us to predict how the ovarian response is going to be. So if it is lower side, then you know, it will have low response. So PCO patient usually, as nicely presented by Dr. Dipankar, that it is high, and it gives we know they are going to be hyper responders. Now, along with the AMH, which is has a good sensitivity and specificity, but it's not 100%, I like to add with this antral follicle count. So whenever, you know, when I decide the dose, I also see to it what is the age of the patient, what is the antral follicle count when we are scanning. Then, of course, if the patient has, you know, has been had a previous IVF, what was her response there in the previous cycle? What is her BMI? So according to all that, we decide the starting dose. And whenever I use the stimulation, preferably we use the FSS, as nicely mentioned by Dr. Shaz, that recommended FSS is better. We should avoid LH component, especially in the PCO patients. And of course, the trigger has to be a agonist trigger in this case to avoid the hyperstimulation.
But now the studies say FSH and HMG have same results. I would like General Ma'am to do, because LH is what that you need also, and it has got short half-life. So nowadays it is not much recommended that you have to give pure, though most of the centers are giving, but HMG is also giving good results.
They are giving HMG, but that's because it's more cost effective. But in that case, you have to do a very close monitoring. You can, anyway, the PCO patients require a close monitoring.
This will happen anyway also. So
yes,
ma'am, I want you to
and close monitoring, because suddenly you can see that, you know, they have a very exaggerated response. They may not be responding, so it has to have a close monitoring, but recommended becomes FSH is a little bit more costly. You can start HMG as long as you are careful with the monitoring, and of course if later on you have a freeze-all and, you know, agonist trigger.
But we have seen in patients, we give 5 patients are receiving recombinant, 5 are receiving HMG. The response is same, or maybe even better with HMG. Ma'am, Jindal ma'am, I want you to.
This is a, you know, very chronic debate, HMG versus recombinant. And I think there's some pharma war also, and some, but literature is a bit confusing. Yes. But I think one thing is very clear, that the cost difference now is not that much after the biosimilars have come. So you do get consistency in dosing, batch to batch variation is less, but at the same time, HMG is also good. It all depends on your experience with a particular product. So it's not, there's very difficult to give hard and fast rules that whether to use HMG or recombinant. But in young patients, I think HMG is also good enough.
So maybe we can start FSH to recruit more follicles, and then we can just shift to HMG so that stabilize.
And have a mixed, also.
Yes, so
Can I just
I think, but see, if you given me a choice, patient can afford, I would go for recombinant.
Right.
Can I just add on a point?
Yes.
Yeah, the probable difference why this debate is actually happening is because all PCOS patients may not have highly elevated LH levels actually in their body. So that's why people are looking forward to subcategorizing these women the ones with PCOS who have extremely high LH values, where you probably adding on a little bit more exogenous LH may not actually make a difference. And the other women where actually giving a combination of FSH and LH might actually turn out to be better. We have had a few experiences where we have gone by our gut feeling of giving recombinant FSH with for starting an IVF stimulation in PCOS, ending up with relatively bad embryos, and that then for a second cycle trying with the combination of FSH and LH, mean to say as GMH, and ending up with better embryos. So that is also possible actually. That's why this debate is never ending.
You are right, and we end this debate by saying that in case the LH is considerably high, we first try to bring down LH and then only stimulate the patient for IVF. Okay, thank you. And Dr. Poonam Lal, would you like to add anything to it? Dr. Anita ma'am, Dr. Poonam? Okay, so we shift to Dr. Ratna. Now the next question is, this question was to Dr. Yes, Dr. Ratna. What give reasons for increased miscarriage in PCOS?
Yeah.
Dr. Ratna, yes. What are the reasons for increased miscarriage?
Yeah, because patients are 3 times more likely for miscarriages, and this is mainly because of hyperinsulinemia and the resultant product, which is called glycogen. This causes increased TH inflammatory cytokines, which activates the clotting system, and this leads to thrombosis in the developing embryo and the fetal decidual interface. And other reasons are because of increased testosterone and increased LH levels. And apart from the fetal chromosomal defects, other reasons for miscarriages are obesity, placental thrombosis, androgen excess, endometrial defects. And the next question is treatment advice. And for these patients, I would like to add metformin.
Dr. Shweta, Dr. Ratna, you're not audible. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, now, sir. Tell. Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, now. We missed last 2 lines only. You were audible before that. Yes.
Okay. The treatment for miscarriages, I would like to add metformin in PCOS patients.
The voice is gone again.
We are able to hear her actually.
Hello?
She's saying she wants to add metformin for increased rate of miscarriages in her patients.
Okay. Right. Dr. Poonam? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is your take on this question?
I fully agree with Dr. Ratna. Yes. Dr. Ratna, we are also adding metformin in such patients.
Because studies have proved, they have done tissue culture on human cells and they have found when you are adding metformin, the response is better rather than leaving them without metformin. So lots of studies have been done. So still there are studies which say that there is no need of metformin, but yes, everybody would agree on the panel that metformin does improve results and everybody must be adding. If there is any difference of opinion, I may invite that.
Basically, it's because of that insulin resistance which is taken care of by this metformin. So that would be the reason.
Yeah. The other added theory, which we were not thinking about probably before about metformin, is about the impaired fibrinolysis being one of the important reasons for increased levels of early pregnancy loss in PCOS women. And that there are a pretty good number of studies which have actually looked at high plasminogen activator inhibitor activity in these particular women, which have actually gone on to cause placental insufficiency and increased thrombotic events, which finally led to early pregnancy loss. And very interestingly, all those patients who were put on metformin and who were found to have a reduction in high plasminogen activator inhibitor activity, those women had reduced incidence of pregnancy loss after metformin was started. And those women where metformin could not reduce the high plasminogen activator inhibitor activity, they continue to have similar rates of pregnancy loss when compared to other women. So that actually nails in the factor of choosing metformin and metformin performing a particular action and finally leading to significantly reduced levels of miscarriage rates.
Dipankar sir, are you there, sir? We want.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Please
Yes.
give inputs. Yes, sir. I just thought, sir, please give us inputs on this. Should we add metformin or should we not, sir?
The metformin is being mostly used in obese women, and I also use metformin along with the clomiphene citrate or any treatment with polycystic ovarian disease. The metformin gives an idea that it might increase the insulin sensitivity so that the surrounding insulin will be less, so there will be less thecal hyperplasia. That is the basic concept of using metformin to improve the insulin sensitization. There are other methods also, but metformin being used, but it is not still 100% or very good evidence practice that metformin gives a very good result in clomiphene citrate or with letrozole.
Right, so since you are there, I just thought, you were not audible. So, sir, what is the ideal, what induction protocol you use in your patients for PCOD, sir? Dipankar, sir? Sir?
Yes.
Sir, what is the protocol that you are using in your center? Yes, sir.
What I am using as a polycystic ovarian disease protocol?
Right, sir. Yes, sir.
I am using antagonist protocol. That is 100% because there is no. The problem. Can I continue?
Yes, sir.
The problem with the antagonist protocol is that if there is a fear of ovarian hyperstimulation and we give the GnRH trigger, the luteal phase is become abnormal and the pregnancy rate is very low, and we have to do a vitrification and freeze everything. And this has to be explained to the patient that if we give what I did, embryo transfer in trigger also to give a very high amount of estrogen and progesterone, and it is mandatory that I should do day 7 after the trigger to do estrogen and progesterone both, and estrogen should be more than 200 and progesterone should be more than 20. If it is not there, then I continue with more doses of the, but I tell you very sincerely, the success rate is very low with GnRH agonist trigger, but definitely it helps me to reduce the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome.
Okay. Sir, another question to you that we missed on you. AMH doses, what is the lowest dose you will say that beyond this patient cannot conceive? Is there the lowest dose also of AMH?
The lowest level of AMH?
Yes, AMH level, right, sir?
The lowest level of AMH, my way of working is that even there is low AMH and patient is still menstruating, that means she is producing at least one egg. So my way of practice is that I should help that woman to have a biological child with her own seed. Right, so I still go for dual stimulation nowadays, and very frequently doing double stimulation, twice stimulation in 1 month, freezing those embryos and then transferring those embryos in a frozen embryo transfer cycle. Even 0.06, which has been, I don't know, it might be an single case, but it happens, and we give a try to the, even a lowest AMH 0.06, the lady is menstruating and had been advised definitely go for egg donation and all. But for high AMH also, I'm telling you one thing, that even nowadays one classification will come very soon with AMH also with polycystic ovary, with it Alexis, I think Alexis classification, I don't know the name properly, but 6.5 nanogram per ml. If it is more than that, so people are trying to include AMH level also in the definition of polycystic ovarian disease. Whenever there is high AMH, it is that we have to clear the calculate the dose properly. And your call on HMG, I am with you that intrinsic level of LH is not so high that you cannot use HMG. Another point with HMG, what you and me are using is not FSH and LH. It is a very micro amount of HCG along with the, so HCG has a very high half-life. So you will get good stimulation even you are using HMG, because we are using a mixed thing with urinary HCG, which is very less amount.
So What is the role of DHEAS in your views for low levels of AMH?
There are, this is a very controversial question. And there are people that if I use DHEA, then I increase the androgen level before aromatization. So if I want to use it, then it should be done with a primary follicle, which is being recruited in 3 months to become a granular Graafian follicle, mature antral follicle. So DHEA should be given for at least 3 months prior to IVF or stimulation. I use those drugs, but frankly speaking, not a very convincing thing. And I use even the testosterone gel also, androgen, this, but the thing is, it is not a very, still I'm not very much convinced about those things, but definitely we use it, DHEA we use it.
Because we have not seen, like we have given to almost 20-30 patients with low AMH level has not gone up with DHEA, though some have conceived. So we don't know what is the right thing. Is it increasing the follicles, improving the follicle quality, or what it is doing?
I am telling, if I add something new to this panel,
Right.
is that the AMH low, what happened in world nowadays, the ovary has been taken out from the body, it is, or we give some cut on the ovary, so that there is a theory that ovary is surface wise, it is too much stressed, so there is no regeneration of the primordial follicle. So there are methods of rejuvenating the ovary with the low AMH also nowadays in world.
Right, sir. Sir, for this present question, sir, increased miscarriage in PCOS, because you taught very beautifully. Only thing is we were slow learners and connectivity problem was there, sir. So what are the reasons for increased miscarriage in PCOS, sir?
I might be a poor teacher also.
You were a great teacher.
Sir, actually, I think you are like, there is not standard 1, standard 2, and you are teachers for postgraduates, and we are still in the kindergarten.
Sir, you are a teacher par excellence.
मैडम
It was
जिंदल बैठी है,
beautifully explained.
मैडम जिंदल बैठी, उनके सामने बोलने में माफी मांगता हूँ मैं.
नहीं
Sir,
बोलिए
ma'am.
बोलिए, ऐसा कुछ
Sir,
नहीं, मैं
ma'am.
तो सुन रही हूँ.
Sir, ma'am Jindal has her own place. You have your own place.
अच्छा,
So
आपने जो
इतना बेसिक्स नहीं आता भाई हमें.
So we have to go to sir actually one day. So tell us the reasons for increased miscarriage in PCOS, sir.
The reason of increased miscarriage is again a confusing thing. The doctor has told that there might be a plasminogen activator inhibitor problem which creates thrombosis also. But the theory behind increased PCOS, increased miscarriage in PCOS is mostly aneuploidy, and whenever there is increased intrafollicular androgen atmosphere, there will be chromosomal non-disjunction, there will be change in number of chromosomes in the primary or secondary oocyte, there might be more chances of aneuploidy. So these are the most common thing which happens with the polycystic ovarian disease. If you do, what is my experience, if you have good blastocyst also in polycystic ovarian disease, sometimes the pregnancy rate is not so good, even though they look very well. So there might be some problem in. There are a lot of things which I was not able to cover, that there are a lot of epigenetic problem also which are not genetics, but there are a lot of things which genes are not exposed in polycystic ovarian disease because of AMH and androgen.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Shweta, next question to you. What is the role of agonist trigger in PCOS? Sir has mentioned just now. So you can tell us what is the role of agonist trigger in PCOS in your expertise. Are you routinely using it, or you are saving it for patients where you just want to do the transfers and OHSS risk? You are just
routinely, I think if it's a typical PCO patient, we are using agonist trigger. And the advantage has already been discussed, that the risk of hyperstimulation has become very minimal, and we have now otherwise the PCO patients are very much at high risk of ovarian hyperstimulation. So agonist trigger, we are also using it. And now the only thing is, because of the effect on the luteal phase, as Dr. Dipankar has already mentioned, usually it is better to do freeze-all, but in selective cases, freeze-all is okay, like for the donors it is fine, or it is for the PGT, we anyway have to freeze. But for the patients whom we are looking forward for a fresh transfer, then in that case the luteal phase has to be very intensive, and we have to give a good dose of progesterone and estrogen. There are different, as mentioned earlier, that we can check the level of estrogen and progesterone, and if it is low, then we can add more progesterone. Also the small dose, if it is not too bad PCOS, then we can even give the dual trigger. So if the E2 is less than 4,000 on the day of trigger, and if it's only few follicles, we can give a very small dose, 1,000 to 1,500 of SCG. But again, we have to be very careful. If the E2 is very high, more than 4,000, and if the follicles or the eggs retrieved are more than 20 or 25, then it is much safer to do a freeze-all, because even small amount of HCG can cause the trigger, can cause the hyperstimulation.
Jindal
Can I just add a
ma'am,
point?
you would like to add anything, ma'am, to this question? Role of agonist trigger in PCOS? I think.
We actually, this dual trigger thing is a little confusing. Confusing in the sense that we also gave dual trigger, but we, you actually in borderline cases, you don't come to know whether they will develop OHSS or not. It's not directly related to estrogen or number of follicles. So we did have few cases of OHSS in borderline cases where dual trigger was given. So we have stopped doing it.
This is not given routinely in your center, ma'am.
We don't do it now. I mean, at least I have prohibited. Okay, nobody will give dual trigger in PCOS cases.
Okay,
In PCOS. I'm saying in PCOS, not in other ways.
Right. So then
Can I just add on a point?
We prefer to freeze the embryos, and then, I mean, we don't try to salvage the fresh cycle and do embryo transfer in the same cycle.
Dr. Shaijis, I'm passing on this question to you actually. Next. Okay.
Can I just add on?
No, this question, sir, you answered. Dr. Shaijis will take next question. Sir, Pankaj, sir, you have to say anything about this? Yes.
I am totally with Madam Jindal that I did this thing with even some high AMH cases. It's not exactly polycystic ovarian disease, and I did dual trigger. I do dual trigger, but not in polycystic ovary. But I did one, and I got caught with severe ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and now it is very difficult to handle those OHSS nowadays. Why we should have those? Because we have good vitrification or freezing techniques.
Sir, dual trigger means we are adding HCG also, like how Dr. Shweta said, but can't we do without just agonist trigger and leave it as?
Yeah, this is what we are saying, that only agonist trigger. We don't see, the only purpose of adding HCG was to do a fresh embryo transfer.
Yes.
Right.
Hello.
Yes. So now it is like, what is the message for the audience is that if you are doing agonist trigger, you have to freeze all, then why not give only HCG and freeze all?
Yeah.
That is the message, ma'am, right?
Hello.
Yes.
So next question we give to Dr. Shaijis. Shaijis, we just exchange your question. What is the ideal luteal phase support in agonist trigger? You have to tell us the doses and the brand name, because sir has already told in details that you have to give extra, and you have to monitor estrogen and progesterone day 7 after the trigger. So what are you giving? If you are giving the trigger first, yes or no? If you are giving, then what is the support you are giving?
Yeah, basically, whenever possible, we do a freeze-all. So this question is probably not relevant to majority of our patients.
Definitely.
Okay, so if we have to, then those are the ones who are kind of normal responders amongst PCOS women, where we attempt to actually transfer in the same cycle. Otherwise, we generally do not. And when we do that, it is just like what Sir said. What Sir said is actually the American approach, if you look at evidence, where we actually frequently keep looking at estrogen and progesterone levels and maintain them about 220 approximately. There are, actually speaking, no specific preparations which need to be used. It could be anything. For maintaining progesterone, the studies have pretty much stated that you can actually give intramuscular progesterones which work well. Otherwise, if you are, for the matter of estrogen, they are estrogen tablets, the estradiol preparation that we generally use.
Right. So what we conclude from this discussion is that agonist triggers we don't favor, because we get poor embryos, poor follicles, lesser to freeze. So best is to freeze all when we are doing IVF and go for the FET cycle. So next question to Dr. Ratna. Pathophysiological changes of hyperinsulinemia on human body. Actually, sir was taking it brilliantly, and we just want you to summarize, Dr. Ratna, because we have more questions. To Dr. Ratna, what are the changes of hyperinsulinemia on human body?
Hyperinsulinemia is often the result of insulin resistance, which will eventually lead to type 2 diabetes, and it leads to increased hunger and thus weight gain and obesity, and it also causes hypertension, cardiomyopathy, atherosclerosis, endothelial dysfunction, thrombosis, and it leads to hyperandrogenemia that will cause increased acne, hirsutism, and it also causes hypertriglyceridemia, dyslipidemia, and causes osteoporosis, nephropathy, retinopathy.
Sir, Dipankar sir, just in brief, we want you to just throw some light on the pathophysiological changes of hyperinsulinemia, like point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dipankar sir.
Pathophysiology changes of hyperinsulinemia in any person.
Yes,
It
sir.
creates a metabolic syndrome that creates hyperlipidemia. Whenever there is hyperinsulinemia, there is obesity or there is an increased fat cell, whosoever, either male or female, hyperinsulinemia is always bad, and it is a detrimental thing, so that we should give a patient an advice to do an weight loss. Weight loss is not easy. So ask her or him to do a exercise of cardio. Cardio exercises you might not lose weight, but whenever you do exercise, there is enhancement of the glut receptors, insulin receptors in fat and muscle. So there will be reduction in hyperinsulinemia. There will be better utilization of glucose. Otherwise, hyperinsulinemia always creates dyslipidemia. Dyslipidemia, very well understand that it creates a lot of atherosclerosis and a lot of problems. This thing which I understand with the metabolomics of the hyperinsulinemia.
Thank you, sir. And next question to Dr. Shweta. This question is to doctor. Now we go in the sequence. Dr. Shaijas, what are the important functions of metformin in improving pregnancy outcome in PCOS patients?
For us, it's a relatively very selected use now. One is those patients who are undergoing an IVF. Those women, we start on metformin and then continue it at least for the first trimester of pregnancy, and sometimes even beyond that, primarily intended to reduce the rates of pregnancy loss, as well as to reduce the onset, the incidence of gestational diabetes in these women. So that's about improving pregnancy outcome. The other categories that we generally use it are for where we have already diagnosed an impaired glucose tolerance prior to achieving a pregnancy, where we might decide to continue. And obviously the ones with clomiphene resistance that we all discussed prior to achieving this pregnancy.
So next question is to Dr. Sir, I shifted to just ninth question. Dipankar sir.
Yes.
Patient has come with high LH, sir, and she's come for treatment, and there is an option. So either we bring her LH down with first, or she's married for say 5 years. So can we go for straight away diagnostic laparoscopy and drilling? Will that help her to bring her LH levels down?
Very difficult question. The thing is, if patient is having LH and she is willing for ovarian drilling, then ovarian drilling is one of the very important mode of treatment in polycystic ovarian disease. It reduces the thecal mass and it reduces the androgen level immediately in the ovary. And whenever there is less androgen available, so there will be less attenuation of the LH, and LH falls, but it takes 2 to 3 months.
Right.
So ovarian drilling or damaging the ovary by any means, not fully damaging, but ovarian drilling 3 or 4 sites may create and help. What I personally do, it is my choice, it might not be acceptable to all.
Yes, sir.
I stimulate the ovary. I stimulate the ovary by even clomiphene citrate or letrozole. And if patient is not willing for IVF, even after that, I aspirate all the follicles.
Okay.
These follicular fluid contains high amount of androgen.
Right, sir.
Whenever you reduce high amount of estrogen from the ovary, there is a sudden drop of intrafollicular or intraovarian androgen, because with surface drilling, you cannot go inside the ovary. So what I do in my practice, you must have seen a lot of patients who are IVF failures, they have spontaneous pregnancy later on.
Correct, sir.
So if while doing an eggs, but because it is an expensive procedure, we do that, it might help to some extent to the patient, but ovarian drilling with laparoscopic ovarian drilling with cautery or laser is still a very beneficial thing to the patient to reduce the androgen load in the ovary and in the body. But one thing should be very important, there should be a lifestyle change, there should be a reduction of weight. Otherwise, laparoscopic ovarian drilling in obese patient won't help.
Yeah, I think, Seema, I want to add, because Dr. Dipankar has made a very important point here. The ovarian drilling has very limited role in PCO. It's not the last resort. It also only works in good prognosis, young patients with a moderate kind of PCO where the follicular AFC is around 15 or something. In very bad ovaries where the AFC is about 25, 30, or LH is very high, obese, where the lifestyle is not good, or there is a prolonged infertility where, all other factors are also there. So one has to be very, cautious about doing ovarian drilling. It's not for everyone. One has to select the cases.
Ma'am, here actually I go with sir, and I'm very happy because of last I think 6 or 7 webinars, everybody is saying that don't go for ovarian drilling because you are traumatizing the ovaries and but what sir has said that he aspirates all the follicles, because we have seen so many patients, they're elderly patients, 32, 33, we take them up for IVF, we aspirate the eggs and they don't fertilize, they are poor quality eggs, and next 2 or 3 months later the patient conceives automatically. So I think this needs more research, and this has a future definitely. And we had 3 sisters. Sister was married for 11 years. The first who came to me, she was 33 years old, and she said, do my test first. We did laparoscopy, we did the drilling. She conceived, though the male factor was quite poor, still she conceived without any assistance from us, neither clomiphene. Then the second sister was married for 8 years. She came, we did her drilling. She also conceived. And then the third sister, who was unmarried at the time, she got married, and 4 years later, she also came with infertility, and just we did was ovarian drilling. So I feel that ovarian drilling needs more more attention, and people like sir maybe can help us to know who have such volume and expertise. So I want to ask other my panelists and chairpersons what is their experience in brief. Dr. Shweta, Dr. Shaijas, yes. Dr. Anita ma'am also, and Dr. Poonam, everybody.
Yeah, we did a thesis on ovarian drilling in resistant PCOS cases who were not responding to 150 milligram of clomiphene citrate. It was 8-10 years back, and we did a thesis on this ovarian drilling, and we got very good results. There were a number of spontaneous conceptions. So I have a very good experience with ovarian drilling.
Yes, we need, I think, institutional practice.
Dr. Seema, I think, when the patient comes in the clinic, if we just say that, there are cases of spontaneous, conception, that is not the only thing, I think I'll go by Dr. Umesh that you have to be selective, because, it's only those cases which are not responding. Otherwise, the thing is, how long will you expect the patient to wait? Now, of course, 32, 33, as you are mentioning, 1 or 2 patients have conceived, but then the effect of age is also happening. So sometimes if it, it is not, so you have to, rather than destroying or, damaging the ovarian tissue unnecessarily, to be more conservative or natural, we have to resort to the, like IVF or the other things. But then we can only give, so in few cases it's fine, where it is not responding, or there is anyway you are doing laparoscopy for some other reason, or patient is not coming up, but not in all the cases, then we should go for the diathermy. So you have to select the cases and give all the options to the patients.
Whenever we are doing diagnosis,
anyway can conceive even after failed IVF. So that is not, even if they don't do, 1 or 2 will spontaneously conceive anyway. So there has to be some, figures and some because nowadays everyone wants to know what is that statistics, which will give. So spontaneous, sitting on a spontaneous conception, you know, waiting when you are already 33, 34, I think most of the patients will also not agree.
I don't know what is the
Yeah,
routine for everybody.
Seema,
Yes, ma'am.
Seema, can I interrupt?
Yes, ma'am.
See, we have to go by the literature evidence. And if we go by the personal experiences, I can quote n number of cases where so-called polycystic ovaries have turned into POIs after ovarian drilling. So I think we cannot quote on personal experiences. We have to go by literature. And the literature evidence is that ovarian drilling done properly in a proper manner is a useful adjunct. I'm not saying it's not, but one has to select the cases.
Ma'am, it's precisely when we are doing a diagnostic labro, and if we find that ovaries are small, their volume is not good, obviously we are not going to puncture. But just make
Seema, see that this discretion is not there with everyone. People start doing drilling for every ovary.
right, ma'am.
So it's not that whenever you are doing diagnostic, put your needle into the ovary. That is the thing which I condemn.
Right.
If you have well selected the cases pre-operatively, you are doing a laparoscopy for drilling. Yes, I am with you.
Dr. Shaijas is smiling all the way. Yes, Dr. Shaijas.
Yeah. No. Wonderful discussion, because I think it's going along the right track on how actually has to go. PCO drilling is probably has to be done with much more indications than a diagnostic laparoscopy. Mean to say that it is not an additional add-on procedure which you will decide on table. Right. Only once you have decided that it's a resistant ovary which is not responding to your routine modes of treatment, those are the only ones who may be a candidate for a drilling. Thank you.
Okay, so we go to next question. Next question is to Dr. Shweta. See, now the IVM is coming up. So you have experience with the IVM, and what is it and what role it plays? When we are talking of PCOS, now we get lots of immature eggs also. Hypermature is one thing.
Yeah, so in vitro maturation, I mean, it is a very good idea for avoiding hyperstimulation, especially in PCO patients. But presently we are not doing it. I don't think it is even by ASRM or other societies, it has become a standard conventional, you know, standard treatment. It can be in few cases, and you know, after explaining to the patient, and the advantage is, of course, you only sort of, you know, you mature it in the lab. So you give, you may give small priming, small dose of FSH, and then you may give trigger and take it out and let it mature in the lab. But still, I think the expertise is also less. Probably the success rate is also less. So I think we need more kind of evidence to make it a usual. With the era of agonist trigger and with the era of, you know, the avoiding this hyperstimulation by the changing the protocol or by choosing antagonist protocol and agonist, I think we have, and with a sort of so much studies and data, I would rather prefer that, and I'm not doing this as a usual standard case.
So before I pass on this question to Sir, just want to tell our audience that in vitro maturation is another thing where we are taking the eggs quite prematurely and then we are culturing them in the media outside. So Sir, Dipankar Sir, you will tell us more about IVM.
Dr. Seema, I did it quite long back, and we did IVM, we tried IVM.
Yes, sir.
I tell you, my personal problem with the IVM is that if you don't put HCG injection as a trigger, the aspiration of immature eggs are very, very, very difficult, because we are using 18 gauge needle for, 18 gauge needle for ovum pickup. And what I did with IVM, 1 or 2 eggs I got and then cultured in culture media. Now the culture media for IVM is different, because you cannot do a simple fertilization media what we are using in embryology lab for IVM. IVM has a different component of media which is available in world. But the thing is, it is so cumbersome and so difficult it was that I tried a lot of this IVM in a lot of patients. But I tell you one thing, when I do give the training for embryology and IVF in my clinic, so we do animal oocytes, goat oocyte. And when we take out those oocytes from the goat ovary, they come out very easily and they mature very well. But for human, very difficult. It is not possible.
Right. Thank you, sir. This was the excellent share, sir. So next question to Dr. Ratna. Sir, you have to be with us. You can't leave us in between. So Dr. Ratna, what is the role of OCP in PCOD?
In PCOS, females who do not wish to
Dr. Ratna?
fertility. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
In PCOS patients who do not desire fertility, OCPs are the first line of treatment to improve the clinical symptoms of androgen excess, such as acne and hirsutism, and also for the regularization of menstrual cycle, thus protecting the endometrium against the unopposed action of estrogen. And the estrogenic content of OCP, it helps in increasing the sex hormone globulin, which thus binds with the androgen and it decreases the androgen level in the blood. And the progesterone content of OCP, it suppresses LH, and thus again it decreases the androgen production. So in that way, OCPs are beneficial in PCOS.
Jindal ma'am?
Yes, ma'am.
Role of OCPs, ma'am?
Yeah, role of OCPs, I think in young girls is very good for menstrual abnormalities, for hirsutism, for acne. I think it's a wonderful drug. You can have any whichever combination you are comfortable with, you can use. And the only thing is, one has to explain to the patient that it has to be taken for long term. See, most of the times what we see is that that people prescribe for 3 months, 6 months. I mean, that should not be done. See, if a young girl comes to you at, let's say, 18 with irregular cycles, this is going to stay. 3 months OCP is not going to help her. If she has hirsutism, you have to give it at least for 2 years for it to have any effect. So they have very, very important role to play in cases of PCO, especially to control most of the symptoms of PCO which they have. The only thing, you have to select an OCP, with what to choose, when to choose, and perhaps continue for long time. Right, and even in married women where you want to give contraception and you want to prevent complications, then OCP has a very important role.
Right now, we talk of PCOS, insulin resistance, and oral contraceptive. So this is still, it's a quandary, and still we need further research. But now they say that we have the latest 3rd generation OCPs where we add some androgen receptor antagonist, and they are better. So I think we are giving the next question to Dr. Shaijas. So he will elaborate more on this. Role of androgen receptor antagonist. Like we are now adding cyclotron or something to the OCPs, and that is what we are prescribing for patients. And Dr. Shaijas, once you finish, I want sir to elaborate more on this point. So what is the role of androgen receptor antagonists?
Yeah, basically primarily dealing with the androgen excess that pretty much commonly seen in this women. And as you rightly said, it's the you can call it 3rd or the 4th generation progestins or the 3rd generation OCPs. Both are basically the same. And one of the most important molecules that are available is drospirenone, which is a spironolactone analog, and that is that occupies the androgen receptors. And primarily, it competes with the testosterone and dihydrotestosterone in exerting its action. So works reasonably well as part of an OCP, and that also maintains the cycle regularity. So on the whole, it works well. The only other components which need to be added here is a competitive antagonist at the level of the androgen receptor called flutamide, as well as the 5-alpha reductase inhibitor called finasteride. Probably if you look at all these 3 categories, the most commonest one that is used is the 4th generation progestin, that is a drospirenone containing pill with its anti-androgenic activity. And probably the next commonest one, which is generally used along with an OCP or all alone, is finasteride, and probably flutamide is used in the least amount when compared to the other 2.
Very right, Dr. Shaijas. So, Dr. Dipankar sir, won't OCPs increase the sugar level, which is already compromised? So what is your take on OCPs in PCOS patients, sir?
I couldn't get your question, Seema.
Sir, we are giving oral contraceptive pills to all PCOD patients. Sometimes you bring LH down, sometimes, but already the obesity is there, sugar levels are high. So won't we be hampering by giving OC pills? Do you recommend or you don't recommend OC pill treatment before starting any cycle in certain PCOD patients, sir?
The OCP has been well said about that. The drospirenone is the choice of progestin because we don't have any choice of estradiol or the ethinyl estradiol or estrogen. But the thing is very important that the cycle of an hair from vellus to terminal is at least 6 months. So any change in hirsute patient with your treatment must be for 6 months at least. And the thing is, what is your question is, if patient is already diabetic, she has to be on anti-diabetic to maintain her sugar level, because this hyperglycemia with polycystic ovarian disease is one of the very severe polycystic ovarian disease. There is insulin resistance, there is hirsutism, and patient is going towards, I think, hair and syndrome towards side. But the thing is, if there is insulinemia, higher insulinemia, and there is a hyperglycemia also, then we have to control the sugar. And regarding the OCPs, the new OCPs for are controlling the cycle. What I do, if I don't want to give her OCP for a whole month, but we want that there should not be any unopposed estrogen, so I give every 5 calendar month a progestin, so that there will be an opposition to estradiol to the endometrium, and she will bleed in the withdrawal bleeding, and there will be exfoliation of the endometrium. So there will not be any problem with the estrogen part of the OCP. But you are maintaining a anti-estrogen for only 5 days, which is very convenient. Suppose any calendar 5 days to the girl with reduction in blood glucose. That helps a lot to my patients, so that she is not going to take every month, the whole month, a drug. If she misses one day, there might be some 1 or 2 days, there might be a withdrawal bleeding. So what I personally do for cycle maintenance and for opposing the unopposed estrogen to the endometrium, just give an anti-estrogen, that is progestogen of a good quality. For 5 days, she will have a regular withdrawal period with cyclical fashion. That gives a very good advantage to the girl. Mostly this happens with adolescent girls and with those newly married couple.
So now there is a request from attendees that sir's lecture should continue rather than the old panel questions. So just we want you to answer 3 questions, sir. You have 3 different patients clinically of PCOD. One is for the normal OPD, not an IVF patient. How do you treat that patient? Second is a patient where you are doing IVF for her, and third is the patient where IVF has also failed. You have done 3-4 cycles. What will you do for those 3 patients? And then we conclude our session with these answers.
The last question is, if I fail for 3-4 cycles, she will not come back to me, so no problem. And the thing is,
but if she comes to us, then what to do, sir? Maybe she will come to us then.
Like, I do a different protocol, and I try to, what I do personally, I tell you.
Yes, sir.
In polycystic ovarian disease, I stimulate, because of this safety of GnRH antagonist and luteal this GnRH trigger, we can make good number of blastocysts. If we have good number of blastocysts, I had a less time, that's otherwise I would have shown everything to you. If there is less number of good number of blastocysts, we freeze them and then transfer them 1 or 2. So there are chances of failing in the next cycle is less. Number 2, your question is, the patient is coming to you, she doesn't want IVF but wants a treatment for fertility. My first drug of choice is nowadays is letrozole, because you give a mild stimulation. Letrozole gives an help that it gives a monofollicular. The problem with polycystic ovarian disease treatment is, you must have heard, there are a lot of chances of multiple order pregnancies, which is very dangerous, and patient doesn't know what is happening, and sometimes they might not be coming to you back after getting a pregnancy test positive, and they might have a multiple pregnancy. That happened surrounding to me. But the thing is, with letrozole, the chances of having multiple pregnancy is less because there is a monofollicular selection. Why it happens, I had no time, otherwise I would have selected that topic also. But the thing is, if patient is not willing for IVF, then this can be done. Or if patient is willing for IVF, definitely I am more pro HMG person. I tell you very sincerely.
Right. So I'm
I
happy.
am,
So, yes.
but I use this recombinant FSH also because recombinant FSH has gone little bit down in cost. And second thing, you have more control with that drug. Third is there is a consistency. So if there is a good quality of HMG, you can use the HMG also. And with that, you can do an IUI. Even with doing an IUI in a polycystic ovarian disease, always remember there will be multifollicular development. There will be chances. There are chances of getting multiple pregnancy. Another very important thing is whenever we do stimulation to polycystic ovarian disease, there are very high chances of, although there is LH, but high chances of attenuated LH surge, which creates problem with the chromosomal disjunction. So there will be more aneuploid oocytes, or there will be more prematurely mature eggs, which might get fertilized but will not implant, or if they implant, they will abort. So controlling the LH level while doing a stimulation is very, very important,
Right.
even though it might be a little bit expensive, but try to use GnRH antagonist, even though you are doing IUI to that patient.
IUI. So one more thing, sometimes we have given latrose and the follicle is not formed. So we are told like add HMG. So what is your take on that? Can we add HMG after latrose also?
We do that. I do IVF also with letrozole and HMG. There is no problem. The
IVF
problem is,
also, but follicle will be less than. Oh,
no,
day
no,
one, day one, day two, you start. Yes, sir.
if they are not developing follicle with your letrozole, I tell you one thing, there are two types of polycystic ovary. One polycystic ovary which stimulates very easily and stimulates hyper. And
Right.
another patient you get where you give n number of drugs, उसको मैं वज्र OPD PCOD बोलता हूँ. मतलब the thing is you cannot move that ovary, then the things becomes a problem. They are very resistant to. So the thing is, give a mild stimulation. Don't go for high stimulation. So my choice is that either I use clomiphene citrate. Nowadays I use more letrozole from day 3 to day 6 for 5 days, 2.5 mg twice a day, and then add, because what happens with letrozole, you are inhibiting the aromatase for 5 days, and letrozole has a half-life of 1 day. The moment you remove the letrozole, there is a sudden gush of androgen from the theca to follicular compartment, and with FSH they convert into, because aromatase is released. With that, if you add gonadotropin along with that on that day, the chances of selecting at least one follicle will be more, but be careful about the premature LH surge if you are doing IUI. So there are patients who cannot be stimulated. There are few patients which we use this gonadotropin later on, but most of the time 1 or 2 follicle we get.
So which day you recommend, sir, HMG? Which day of
It is an
same third day?
individualized thing what you do, but the thing is that whenever you finish the letrozole, try to start letrozole early so that you finish the letrozole mid follicular, so that you have a choice, what Madam Jindal has told earlier, that you have a choice of rest of the follicular part to give a stimulation to that follicle which has been selected by letrozole, supporting those 1 or 2 with your gonadotropin. You can use HMG very well, no problem, because HMG contains slight amount of HCG. HCG is a very good stimulator of theca and granulosa, because HCG gives a better chance of selection, and it has a longer half-life, so it works well. Nowadays, all HMGs are coming with micro amount of HCG.
Sir, any adjuvants you recommend for PCOD? There are minoxidil, this, that. Any adjuvant should be used in these patients, sir?
These chiroinositol or inositol, whatever is being used, they are, if you remember your physiology days, these are all second messengers, second cell messengers. Whenever there is a phosphoinositol or phosphoinositol triphosphate, the insulin which stimulate the insulin receptors and opens the glucose transferase, this insulin receptor doesn't act inside. It is a tyrosine kinase sort of receptor which stimulates the inside the cytoplasm of IP3, that is inositol phosphate triphosphate. I'm not going into that detail, but if you give inositol extra, that second messenger will work better. So it will help to increase the insulin sensitization to improve the utilization of glucose. This is the basic funda why myoinositol, D-chiroinositol, they have come in market to help the biguanides like this metformin and all, or to improve the second messenger for the insulin receptor which is not working. Then it helps to do a improvement in glucose transferase so that glucose can be utilized better with the present amount of insulin.
So some patients respond so much better to these adjuvants. Like we have some lean PCO, waist PCO, some will respond, some will not respond to these adjuvants, myoinositol and all.
The evidence-based practice with inositol is still not, it is a controversial study. There are few studies which helps. There are few studies which say it is not. If you, like one person, Norbert Gleicher from USA, if you go to his YouTube videos and all, what he is telling, he is very, very, very good. He compares these studies. There are good studies. There are against those things. It is not well evidence based, but it is a common sense that if you give a inositol triphosphate or myoinositol to a patient, might help to improve the insulin sensitization.
You recommend it, sir. We take it from you. And so endometrial support in these patients, is it recommended? Sometimes the endometrium remains poor in spite of good follicles. So what can we do to improve the endometrium?
The endometrium, when it is less, that means the endometrium either itself is bad or there are less amount of estrogen being produced. Whenever there is less amount of estrogen being produced by the follicle, that means you are stimulating the ovary and there are less amount of estrogen in the body. Either supplement that estrogen, but be careful, more you give estrogen, there will be more rise in LH automatically. So there are views that intravaginal estrogen or estradiol tablets can be given to improve the endometrium. But most of the time what I face that endometrium, most of the time itself is in problem. But if you use those like clomiphene citrate, which is anti-estrogen mostly, so that's why the clomiphene citrate has gone little bit away and letrozole came, because letrozole is not anti-androgen.
So estrogen, then what is the dose you will recommend for a patient? And which day we have to start estrogen for our all attendees to know?
Most of the time I in my patients I avoid estradiol. I more give this sildenafil citrate in transvaginally or low to molecular dose, this aspirin, low dose aspirin, and if requires, then I do a serum estradiol. I tell you sincerely, I do a serum estradiol. If there is more than 250 or 300 picogram per ml of her in her body, which is normally happening in the regular natural cycle, and endometrium is not growing, then things are in problem with the endometrium, I tell you. So even in frozen embryos transfer cycles, if I give this estradiol a lot, but endometrium is not growing, then there is a whole topic of discussion.
Yes, we were just trying to share as much as we can from you in the minimum possible time. Sir, you talked about testosterone. You said you are using testosterone in some patients, sir. What was that?
Testosterone gel, I use testosterone. There are testosterone. Now companies has come with testosterone gel packets. Should be used. If you open it, use it. And there is one company.
Indications for testosterone gel? What are the indications?
Indication of testosterone gel, whenever there is a low AMH, there is a low pool of eggs. So we want to have more estradiol, converting from the theca to.
In place of
is not producing,
we can use testosterone gel.
Yes.
Basically, that is for poor responders, not
right. Ma'am, you can share your experience. You are using testosterone gel,
yeah, see, so that's another topic. that's another topic that we
We'll have some
for responders. I think not in PCO.
Right. So this was the most wonderful session we had with Dipankar sir. And sorry sir, we will have dedicated teaching session with you because this was like we had all types of attendees, so we had to modify it in this way. Thank you so much, sir. You are definitely the most intelligent person I have come across, and we will look forward to many more meetings with you. And Umesh Jindal ma'am is so busy, but still she took out time, and we are so grateful to you, ma'am, for such important inputs. And Dr. Poonam Lal, definitely her thesis work helps us, and ma'am has done a wonderful thesis on laparoscopic drilling. We would like to share when we have a operative session, surgical session. We would like to have more from Dr. Poonam and Dr. Anita
Sure.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Shweta, Dr. Shaijas, and Dr. Ratna. And thank you, Team Jackson Pal. And this happens to be PCOD month also. And definitely something has been added to our knowledge. And since knowledge is continuous process, we will go on meeting and hope to see you all soon. Thank you, Team Jackson Pal, and over to Deepika ji.
Thank you very much, ma'am. On behalf of Jackson Pal, the makers of Cystelia M, the right combination of 40:1 ratio of myoinositol and D-chiro-inositol, and we have Cystelia 35, the most effective OC pill for PCO with cyprotron acetate and ethinyl estradiol. Also Lycored Preg sachet, which contains L-arginine, DHA, and lycopene to avoid pregnancy complications. I'm Dr. Deepika. Along with my teammates, we all thank all the experts for sharing such knowledge, especially during the PCOS Awareness Month of September. We truly appreciate the presence of all attendees for your unending support. We hope to go a long way in knowledge sharing. And please do block your dates September 16th and September 30th for more PCOD related webinars. Thank you very much, and it is a goodbye from all of us.
And ma'am, Umesh ma'am, for the conference we have, IFS conference, very important event coming.
Yeah, I've written a message for everyone, but those who are still present, that we are going to have a virtual conference for division on 4th, 5th, and 6th December. On 29th, we have 10 workshops. And the website is on, and you can go to there. We are still putting information on that, but registration is open. And during the conference, we have more than 40 international faculty who have already confirmed us. So it's going to be an extraordinary session which we have, and then we are going to have very interesting quiz, and then oral papers and poster presentations are there. Trade exhibition is there. So all components of a good national conference are going to be there, but with some limitation of virtual. But at the same time, you have an advantage that all of you can attend that sitting in your homes at much less cost what we usually have to spend for attending a conference. So I welcome you all to there, and you must visit the site and register as soon as possible, and contribute your research activities if you have any, please.
And join IFS. We have
yeah, this is being organized by Chandigarh, Haryana. Seema is one very important part of it. Haryana, Punjab, and Himachal chapters. So we have to make
person, Dr. Umesh Jindal ma'am, and ma'am is the wonderful host. Unfortunately, this is virtual. Otherwise, we really enjoy her hospitality. And IFS, we have the website where the forms are available, because we get questions from so many of our participants that how can we become the member. So please go to the website, log in, and just look for the form and fill it, and you can become the IFS member.
Yeah, and registration is open. So please.
For the conference.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.